Good morning.
Good morning, Father.
So this is the third week of Lent as we are moving along through this season of renewal. And for Lent, as you probably have noticed, we have chosen a theme, and the theme is relatively simple. Why, when God does not make sense? You see, sometimes things God says and does, or things God doesn't say or do, don't make sense. And as we kind of began the exploration of this idea, we said that first, it makes perfect sense that sometimes God does not make sense. If God is all-wise and all-knowing, and we human beings are limited in our wisdom, limited in our knowledge, it makes sense that we don't always understand God's way of doing things. You know, actually, it should not surprise us that we do not. You know, but there are sometimes people will say, well, God does not make any sense to me, and they give up on God altogether. But that actually should not surprise us. You know, that sometimes God will puzzle us. So that's number one. Number two, we said that, in fact, sometimes it's not really God who does not make sense, but life that does not make sense. Not everything that happens to me in my life is God's doing or is the will of God. You know, and so sometimes it's just life that is puzzling and life that does not make sense. And the world is imperfect, isn't it? The world is broken. And number three, if God is God and I am not God, of course we will misunderstand God sometimes, as Chris talked about last week. You know, we cannot know the mind of God fully, but sure, we can know something about God, and we should strive to know and understand God's ways. But the truth of the matter is we'll never know the mind of God fully, but what we can know is the fact that God is love. So we can know the heart of God, even though sometimes we struggle with knowing the mind of God. We can know the heart of God. So when it comes to our relationship with God, it's like our human relationships. When it comes to our relationship with God, love needs to be a starting point, not the understanding. Love is a deal breaker, not understanding. So it starts in the heart. Okay? And God invites us to draw closer to His heart, and that heart is love. Now, today we want to look at times when God does not seem to cooperate with us, when God does not seem to be on the same page with us. And we all have had that experience. You know, when it seems like God is not following my instructions. And I thought the instructions were clear. And even sometimes it seems like God makes it even more difficult. I don't know if you ever had that experience in your life. You know, it seems obvious to me that if God would just remove all the obstacles, then life would be much easier. Life would be much better. And maybe the obstacle is in the relationships. Maybe the obstacle is in your professional life. Maybe the obstacle is the health that you struggle with. Maybe the obstacle is a spiritual one. But it would be nice if God would just kind of come in and sweep away all the obstacles that we face in our lives. That would make sense, wouldn't it? Today we look at the story of Moses to get more insight into it. You see, in the Bible, the lives of the people that God chooses for special mission are always filled with obstacles. And look at Moses. He is that great hero of the Bible. He brought people out of Egypt from the slavery through the Red Sea into the promised land. They're going into the promised land through the deserts. And we all know that story. And the journey should have lasted the most a couple of weeks. But look, they will spend 40 years in the desert. And that is not what they expected. That's not what the deal was supposed to be all about. So now, you see, when your expectations are not being met, what do we all do? We start complaining. We complain. So we read in the book of Exodus today, which is our first reading. In those days, in the thirst for water, the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "Why did you ever make us leave Egypt? Was it just to have us die here of thirst with our children and our livestock? Is God with us here or not?" So now Moses hears that complaint, and he goes to God and he cries out to God, "What shall I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." Well, the people are upset. Their expectations are not met. They wish they never left Egypt. They'd rather be in slavery. They are angry. They are hungry. They are thirsty, unsure of the future. And they are in a very dangerous place. And it's been now a long time. So they blame Moses. So what they do, they blame God. It does not make sense to them that they should be there. You see, when the journey didn't go quite as planned, perhaps as they might have hoped the journey should have, when the difficulty presented itself, the question was, would they go to God or would they grumble and complain against Moses and God? You see, there is a big difference here in this story between Moses' reaction to the difficult situation and the reaction of the people to the difficult situation. The people complain against God and against Moses, but Moses does something different. He does not blame God. He does not speak against God. He does not complain against God. Moses complains to God, and he brings to him his concern, and Moses asks for direction rather than blaming God or dismissing God. And that's the huge difference in the story. And God ultimately provides, and Moses, with that same staff that he parted the Red Sea and removed the water, with that same staff he hits the rock, and now he brings the water in order to provide and quench the thirst of the people. So now what's the lesson here for all of us? Well, maybe there is a lot of lessons, but maybe one of them is this. You see, like on the journey of the people of Israel, there are difficulties in our lives, and some difficulties can be avoided, and they should be avoided. But there are also situations in life that call us not to give up just because it is difficult. Not to give up just because it is difficult. You know, some people go from one job to another job, or from one company to another company, or from one relationship to another relationship, or one commitment to another commitment, because when the going gets tough, they take off like a plane. They run away when they face difficulties. And that's the real temptation. That's what the people of Israel wanted to do. They just wanted to run away. But you and I, we know that nothing worth accomplishing in life is easy without obstacles or challenges. And that is not just bad luck. That is life. And the truth of the matter is that God is not there to place obstacles in our lives. Life does it, not God. That's not the will of God for us to have obstacles. And Moses indeed faced obstacles. People wanted to stone him. But in the midst of the difficulty, he leaned into God. He did not blame God. He did not dismiss God. He did not speak against God. He leans into God. He asks for direction. He speaks to God and not against him. So in conclusion, if we are willing in our lives, especially when we face obstacles, to lean into God, to depend upon His grace, God will provide for us as well, the way God provided for Moses. We will see God's power. But not when we dismiss God, not when we blame God, but when we lean into God. That's when God's grace is most powerful in our lives. You see, life has never been meant to be a straight journey from point A and point B. It has twists. If we can come to God like Moses and speak to Him honestly about whatever the obstacle is, whatever the challenge is, but really speak to God honestly, not hide anything, God can do amazing things, and God can help us overcome any and all obstacles the way He did in the desert with Moses.
Thank you for being with us this morning. It was wonderful to see all of your faces here. For those of you who joined our live stream, thank you for joining us this weekend. And please join us again next Sunday. You know, a funny thing happened to me yesterday before I came to church. I was rushing because I was late for rehearsal here, and I made a phone call. And so I'm outside talking on the phone, and the conversation didn't go particularly well. And I started getting really upset and angry, and my stomach was all tense, and my blood pressure started to rise. I was sweating. It totally messed me up. And it's funny because conversations with my mother don't usually go like that, but that's the way it happened yesterday. And but I was thinking about it, and if I'm not careful, I can let something like that really kind of bubble up and upset me, and you can get resentful and defensive and bitter, and then next thing you know, it becomes this huge obstacle in my life. And sometimes the obstacles in our lives we are responsible for, or at least in part. But as Father reminded us, God is always with us, ready to be invited inside of this obstacle, of this problem, not necessarily to remove it, but to help us to understand it, to help us to deconstruct it. And God is also there always, every second, in any problem that we want to involve him in, to give us the courage, the heart to love. And maybe some of these obstacles would never have happened in the first place if we could let God into every second, every moment of our lives, every decision, everything that we do. So, God bless you all. Have a wonderful week. Stay warm and well and safe, and we'll see you next week.